What is going on to all my movie fan, DC fan, Flash fans? It is that time to talk about The Flash. And as the headline reads and as the video reads, this is a spoiler discussion. And I'm not alone. As you all can see on the screen now, I have my man Griffin from Film Speak. Griff, man, I think the last time we had like a discussion about a film was last year for Avatar, which was a great discussion. And I couldn't think of anyone better to talk about The Flash with than yourself, man. How are you doing, Griff? What's going on, man?
Dude, I'm glad to be here. I always love when we can catch up and talk about movies and all that good stuff. So I'm stoked to talk about this one because I think there's a lot to discuss. And I think as more people have started to see the movie, we've come to realize that it's not as, overly positive. The reception isn't as overly positive.
Is it not the greatest comic book movie of all time? Quoted by Tom Cruise and James Gunn himself?
Yeah. That's how much did they pay Tom Cruise for that little pull quote?
I don't know. Maybe Warner Brothers will pay for the next big stunt for Mission Impossible 8, or maybe if there's another crossover with a DC actor like Henry Cavill, maybe they'll bite the bill and remove the mustache for whatever character.
Yeah.
We'll see, man. But definitely a lot of hyperbole. And me and Griff will break it down for you all in today's spoiler discussion. But first, hey, if this is the first time that people are coming across not only this channel, but seeing your wonderful content and commentary, Griff, why don't you introduce yourself? Let the people know where they can find the wonderful stuff you have over at Film Speak.
When it comes to movies, video essays, all that good stuff, you can find that over on the Film Speak channel. I'm a little behind. I haven't gotten my Spider-Verse video out yet, but that's just because I had a lot to say. It's like probably like a 50-minute video, but it's a really good one. Rise of the Beasts. Obviously, we'll have a Flash one as soon as possible. So it's a lot of good stuff on there.
The deep dives are incredible. Cannot wait for your insight on Into the Spider-Verse or Across the Spider-Verse 6. I saw your video on the difference between No Way Home and that, and it was just a great video. So I'm really excited to see your thoughts on that. Man, this film, The Flash, is well documented that it has seen a lot of different variations from Robert Zemeckis, Rick Famuyiwa, Phil Lord and Chris Miller. Ezra Miller and Grant Morrison had their hands in the script at one point. I mean, it has been a hell to get this movie on the big screen, Griff. So putting that aside, just kind of a question I have for you was, what has your relationship been with the broken DCEU thus far, and what was the anticipation level going into The Flash for the first time?
Yeah, so I've been a big fan of the DCEU. Really, I'm a fan of Snyder's take on the characters. I've loved both Wonder Woman movies. I liked Birds of Prey. I mean, I wasn't a big fan of Suicide Squad, but that kind of had its own set of issues, studio interference and all that stuff. So it's kind of really hard to judge just that. I genuinely have enjoyed most everything the DCEU has put out. And I love the Flash. Flash was actually probably my favorite comic book character as a kid. I guess it was weird because it was like, as I got older, I kind of forgot about that. I grew more attached to, I guess, just Batman and a bunch of other characters that I just found to be more interesting. Watching this movie reminded me how much I just kind of related to Barry Allen in a lot of ways. So I really connected with the film in a way that I wasn't expecting. Really excited for it. I wasn't crazy about Ezra Miller's casting when they were first announced back in the day, but they really won me over in Zack Snyder's Justice League, and I was like, oh, okay, I get it. I get what Zack Snyder saw in this actor to be able to bring Barry Allen to life, and I thought Ezra Miller did just that in this film. I was really stoked for it. You mentioned Robert Zemeckis, and I actually had no idea that he was even attached to do this. But it makes a lot of sense because this film feels a lot. Well, yeah, I mean, like not even just like the Back to the Future influences, but like there's like a zaniness to this movie that feels very Robert Zemeckis, and so that's I had no idea, but that's really funny. But yeah, man, this thing. They've been trying to make this movie happen for a while. We finally get it. I think it delivers. I mean, like for the most part, like there are things that I didn't love, but I also think that it's a really solid movie with a strong heart. So all that waiting, I guess, paid off.
Like you, I'm a big fan of the DCEU. Yes, it has its highs and it has its lows, and a lot of studio interference, a lot of behind the scenes drama. But and also, as you mentioned, with Ezra Miller, which I think we've all have spoken our thoughts on. None of us agree what they've done in the last few years. It's been a mess, and it kind of affected my excitement for the film. But similar to you, Griff, I grew up with these characters, love Justice League Unlimited, big fan of The Flash. But as I've gotten older, yeah, Batman has become my favorite comic book character. Love Wonder Woman, Green Lantern. But The Flash was kind of forgotten about for a few years. And then I kind of got reinvigorated with the character once for the first few seasons of The Flash on CW. I'm like, yes, that's what I love about the character. Unfortunately, I can't speak for the further seasons of that show, but I love Barry Allen. And I think, like you said, as we'll talk about, they did a great job of bringing out a lot of things I love about Barry Allen and getting to see the various different versions of a more mature Barry Allen versus a younger Barry Allen. As we'll talk about, I really enjoyed that. And of course, as I'm rocking the shirt, big Batman fan, and we'll definitely get into Mr. Michael Keaton of it all. But we're here to talk about it, man. And I guess one of the first things to kind of navigate into this film, starting off with the person, as I mentioned, so many different directors and writers and people having their hands in this film to try to bring it to fruition. And then the one person that did it was Andy Muschietti. Now, for you, Griff, my relationship with Andy Muschietti has been pretty fantastic. With Mama, wasn't the biggest fan of it too, but Chapter 1 is fantastic. And just as a visionary director, I'm a big fan of his. And I want to get your thoughts on his direction of this huge undertaking, because I almost related to Mike Flanagan's Dr. Sleep. I don't think he gets enough credit for not only giving us a sequel to a film that the writer wasn't the fan of from Stanley Kubrick, but giving us a sequel to a film based on a book while giving his own take on the source material. It's a lot that he did. And the same could be looked at with Andy Muschietti, with all the different iterations of new leadership in the DCEU, all the different, okay, this is going to tie into the future. It's a lot that he did. And I think for the most part, Griff, he did a good job. So I just want to get your thoughts on what Andy Muschietti was able to do with his direction while also balancing the various different tones that this film tackles.
It's interesting because he's not necessarily someone that I would have picked to direct a Flash movie, but after he showed himself to be a great filmmaker and was able to work within the studio system well, they went to him, especially when wacky kind of cosmic stuff going on here. It kind of feels like you can kind of connect the dots between what he was doing in the It movie, It Chapter 2, and this film, down to some of like the Amblin sort of like kids stuff in the first film. There's a little bit of that. Barry goes back, and it's mainly just the two Barrys together. Right. I see why he was chosen. I thought he did an excellent job. Like, Andy Muschietti he's a really solid filmmaker, and I think he proved his worth in the genre, in the comic book genre, with this film. As opposed to a lot of comic book movies that come out, this one has a really strong authorial stamp. Like, there's a lot of really interesting camera movements, weird humor. I can't stress this enough. Like, this movie is bizarre in the best way possible.
It really is.
Like, it's totally not what I was expecting, but I kind of like that he just sort of swung for the fences with a lot of stuff. It worked. It shows just the kind of like interesting storyteller that he is. But I mean, movie that I think is going to get shit on for its visuals, he really did do a lot of interesting things visually that were not VFX related, which I know we'll get into a little bit later on. I enjoyed how he played with the camera, how he showcased like the Speed Force and stuff like that, like that Coliseum with all the possible scenarios. Like, that was so cool, regardless of whether or not it looked as good as it could have with the final VFX. The idea and mostly the execution was great. I thought he understood that the core of the film was the relationship between Barry and his mother, and I think as some other filmmakers would have gotten lost in the multiversal shenanigans, that was consistent all the way through. You don't get distracted. At least I didn't get distracted by Michael Keaton coming in, or Kara Zor-El or Zod or any of those things. Those are never really the focal points. The anchor and the focal point is consistently Barry and him trying to come to terms with the trauma of his past. And I don't think you're able to do that without a strong filmmaker who understands the kind of story that is being told within the context of the multiverse. Screenwriters, John Francis Daly and I think it's John Francis Daly, right? And Jonathan Goldstein. They are fantastic. They were two of the screenwriters involved in rebooting Spider-Man in the MCU. They also, I believe, were behind Dungeons and Dragons and Game Night. And you see a lot of that.
Game Night. Oh my goodness. Love that movie. I mean, it's great. Fun, quirky energy in there. And then also, I think the MVP of the writing, I feel like you can really see her style in there, is Christina Hodson, who is really proven herself to be the DC
not DCEU, the DC universe's ace in the hole, and for a lot of these projects. To Prey, she was great here. I think they would be foolish not to continue working with her, to revitalize this universe. And so, obviously, all credit to Andy Muschietti, because this thing doesn't work without a strong directorial force like him. But those writers really brought it, and I think they crafted a damn good script.
To the Christine point, whether it's Bumblebee, Birds of Prey, she was slated to, well, she did write it. Unfortunately, we'll never see it, but Batgirl, she was credited for that.
Right.
And if the rumor is to be true, that we might see this team collaborate again with the Brave and the Bold, and I'm here for it, man. Talk about the Batman, because I think something that he did brilliantly, not only showcasing how badass Batman is, going head up with a Kryptonian later in this film with Michael Keaton, but also showing the vulnerabilities of Bruce Wayne. And we get a lot of those quieter moments with Barry and both Bruce Waynes in this film, which I appreciated. But again, to just piggyback on what you were saying about not only the writing team, but Andy Muschietti's direction, again, I thought that on all fronts, they all brought their best abilities and sensibilities as creators to this project. As you mentioned, we'll talk about the visual effects more in depth, but I thought just showcasing what I love about what makes Flash so amazing as a superhero, man. I mean, again, going back to being a kid and just being fascinated with just the surface level of someone being as fast as the speed of light. But what does that mean visually, and the science fiction of it all, and how they displayed the powers of Barry was just something I really enjoyed. So I totally agree with you, man. I thought the direction, the writing was definitely pretty top tier. But kind of pivoting over to the actual writing of it all and the story, again, this is famously taken upon, which I still don't know if I totally agree with, the first time we get a Flash solo outing is a Flashpoint storyline, but they did the best they could with it. But a lot of us, if you're not too familiar with it, this fundamentally speaking, it follows a lot of the same story beats with that, as you mentioned, Barry's trying to save his mother. Of course, in the comics and the animated movie, there's a lot more to it with Arthur going against Wonder Woman and coming. It's a lot, which I know at some point this film was trying to tackle that. Cyborg was going to be involved in it a lot more, but of course, like I said, there's 15 different scripts that was out there for the film. But regarding this movie, Griff, man, the basic foundation of Barry having the power to go back in time and to not only save his mother, but also save his father, as we go on this emotional journey of trying to bring back his past and trying to relive those moments with the person he loves and both of his parents. But in the meantime, on that journey, we have, unfortunately, he messes up the timeline, goes back in his timeline, comes across his younger self, meets a Michael Keaton in his universe, meets a Supergirl, and all hell breaks loose. So narratively speaking, Griff, was this film, as far as from getting to A to Z, did the story work for you as a whole?
Oh, yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know a lot of people have said, I would have liked to see them do Flashpoint a little bit down the road. And I get that. I had the same thought initially, because I think it's you got to establish the characters. You have to do this. And at the same time, he's already been established in Justice League and Zack Snyder's Justice League. I think we get a solid kind of grasp of the character there. Here, I feel like they're able to take him to the next level. And I think just in general, the idea of Barry thinking that he can go back in time to save his mom over his past and get rid of his trauma. It's a really naive way of thinking. That's a line of thought that would come from pretty early on in their superheroing careers. So to me, it makes sense that would be the first big thing that he wants to do, whether or not it's a multiversal sort of thing or not. Struggling to kind of come to terms with the demons of his past, realizing he has this great power and is not using it the way that he should be. It's an interesting thing for that character. I think Barry's so good-hearted and just pure as a person, and I think sometimes that gets the better of him. He thinks that he can go out and just do things without any repercussions, that he can save everyone. The mature thing about this film is that he learns that he ultimately can't, that sometimes you need to let the past die in order to grow from it, in order to learn from it. You can still cherish those memories. You can still look back on it fondly, use it to inform your future, but you can't live in the past. I dug the story a lot, and the way they integrate Michael Keaton into the mix it feels natural. It doesn't feel forced or anything. I liked that it wasn't a hold for applause, cameo, entrance. It was just an organic way of bringing him into the story.
I agree with you more on the story point. And one thing to point out that I couldn't agree with you more with just the idea of with comic book movies, science fiction. We're in space, we're fighting aliens, we're saving the universe. A lot of that stuff is fantastical. And the core of this story, as you just mentioned, I think the human nature of the story is, if we all had the opportunities of having Barry Allen's powers, we know the repercussions of changing your past, but who wouldn't want to go back and see someone that they love? Who wouldn't want to go back and save their mother from death and having their father be sent to prison? I think that's a human story that we can all relate to, and pain and trauma we can relate to, which I think is the groundedness of why I really appreciate not only Flash as a character, but this Flashpoint story and how they handle it in this film. And just like also from a meta standpoint, I'm obviously stretching here, but I'm just thinking of, narratively speaking, Andy Muschietti and the creators and the writers, and the intent of this DC film was to kind of erase, not necessarily Snyderverse, but erase the past and open up something new. And I think narratively speaking, as Barry's trying to go back and fix the past, as this film is kind of going back to things that we've loved from the DCEU, whether it's a cameo from Ben Affleck, Gal Gadot, going to the 2013 Man of Steel, but you can't fix the past. You got to embrace all the issues that we've had with the DCEU. And as Barry kind of comes to realization of, like, you can't fix it, but you have to move on, learn from it. Hopefully, again, we'll get that with DCEU with James Gunn. So metaphorically speaking, again, I might be stretching there, just like looking at it from an outside perspective, is like, you can't fix what we got with Suicide Squad, Zack Snyder's, but you have to learn from those mistakes, and hopefully come in the future, we get a brighter future.
And I think that it goes, to me, it goes beyond just the DCEU. Like a great send off to the DCEU, and just like kind of laying it to rest and being like, yeah, this happened. We had a great time with it. It wasn't the cleanest, but whatever, we made the most of it, and there was like stuff that came out of it. Especially when we get to like the climax of the film, with all of the cameos and stuff, which I know there's point of controversy, and I'm of two minds, because I get it, but also I think the film as a whole kind of is a cautionary tale of nostalgia, and so a way a lot of the stuff is presented towards the climax, at least to me, felt like it was purposefully supposed to be off-putting. Like even before then, there were scenes in the middle where like Barry enters Michael Keaton's bat cave, and he's going around. The young Barry's like, "Oh my god, look at all this bat shit," and he's like, it's very much the audience. And then there's the other Barry, the older Barry, who's like, "Dude, what? Like, stop trivializing this stuff. We have gimmick. Like, we're trying to." There is a story to tell here. If we're going to use these things, these toys or whatever, we're going to use them. I don't know how many people are really going to give the movie the credit I think it deserves for actually being, I would consider to be like an anti-nostalgia film, or at least a cautionary tale of like wanting all of these things, like of us as fans wanting to like resurrect the past in order to make us feel better, and not wanting to let certain iterations of characters die, even though they've had their time and we need to move on from it. And so I think using the vehicle of a Flash movie to tell that kind of story, where he's got his own personal problem that kind of is in line with that, in order to comment on this larger nostalgia craze, the cameoification of blockbusters that has kind of taken over tentpole filmmaking right now. Like, I don't know. I think that was pretty insightful, and I don't know if that's, again, to your point, I don't know if that's like us reading too much into it, or if that was like genuine intent. I have no idea. I think it's a little bit of like them having their cake and eating it too, and so it doesn't quite line up. Yeah, right. It's as clean as perhaps it could have been.
Sure.
But I think I don't know. It works for the most part, at least for me.
I think it's starting to feel more authentic to the narrative, and I think that's why, even taking outside the James Gunn and the Peter Safran and all, how they've kind of really latched on to the Flash, and how they were not marketing much of Shazam of it all, and maybe some Aquaman 2 of it all, how they've embraced Blue Beetle. So I think narratively, and I'm not saying that James Gunn had his hand in crafting this film, even though I think that he definitely had his hands on tweaking some of the ending that we'll talk about. But I wouldn't be surprised if that was the intent, to have that be a focal point of this film, of moving past the past mistakes and learning from those mistakes and growing out of it, hopefully with a brighter and better future with the DC characters. So I thought the story was just great all around, and how all the other secondary characters play into this narrative of forgiveness and trauma, whether it's Supergirl or Batman. And of course, which perfect segue into the performances of it all, highlighting whether it's Ezra Miller playing the various versions of his older self and talking to his young self and how he learned from that, whether it is Michael Keaton having his moment to shine, Sasha's character as Supergirl, Ben Affleck's cameo, which he even has come out and said that he feel like he's found the perfect Batman, the mix of the character in his short screen time.
I definitely felt that.
The moment that he has, more so, I love the action. Don't get me wrong. You know, I love Batman in action. But yeah, the moment when he's sitting down talking to Barry about his past and his trauma and how his scars have shaped him, that to me was one of the most performance-wise, and I love, you know, him and BVS and all the different variations, Just League. But yeah, that was probably the most earnest and sincere moment that we've gotten from Ben Affleck. But yeah, Griff, take it away, man.
Affleck, I'll just say, like, I thought he really nailed it. I think he managed to. I don't know if it was just me, but it felt like he was even drawing a bit upon like Adam West's interpretation of Batman. Like there was something about his delivery where it was like, this guy kind of understands every iteration of the character better than maybe any other actor who's played the role. And I see him incorporating it into this version of Batman. We've gotten like when he took on the role, he was very dark, brooding, almost like militaristic and like and broken. Yeah. Like he was like he was a bad guy because of everything that had happened. And gradually we see him start to find the light. And I think by the time that we see him here, that character has really gone through every bit of progression you would want him to go through. And so what is left for him but to be a mentor figure to the person who is closest to him and that can relate with him the most, which is Barry Allen. And I think Ben Affleck understood that that's where that character is at. Can be someone who's a bit wistful. He recognizes that he's made a lot of mistakes in his life, and he's trying to make sure that that doesn't happen to other people, but he can be a bit more lively and I don't, maybe jovial is not the right word, but there is a lightness to him, even though he is a dark individual. Ezra Miller's fantastic. There's really no beating around the bush. Like I really hate to say it just because of the menace that I guess have continued to be for a while. But they're terrific. They're playing Barry. I mean, multiple versions of Barry so well.
We count the Dark Flash, you know, the small little moment when he takes off his mask and has his moments of regret and kind of his torture that he's been through.
Exactly. And it's like they all feel like the same person, just at different stages in their lives. And so he has to kind of tweak, or they have to kind of tweak their performance ever so slightly to match the headspace of that individual. I know it's like kind of insane to say, but just like the rapport that they have with themselves is ridiculous. It's so effective. It feels so natural, as if there are literally two versions of them in the same room.
One might say that Ezra Miller might have been doing a little bit of method acting.
Yeah, right. No, for
themselves.
It's very, very impressive, and they felt like they felt very true to the spirit of Barry Allen, even though I know Ezra Miller is not the person we think of when we think of Barry Allen, but for this universe, they really have they've helped define who the character is, whether or not it's like their inability to connect with other people because their mind's going faster than their body. And even when their body's able to catch up, they know what to do. They're just sort of like running in circles. They're always running late. They're always getting distracted. There's like an ADHD to the character that I think I personally resonated with. The really emotional moments
stuck with me on that second viewing. I enjoyed it the first time I saw it, but I saw it last night as we're pre-recording this, and I wouldn't say I was a mess, but the visceral nature of when he's saying goodbye to his mom that final time, it got me the second time. Like I teared up a bit, man. It really hits home. But continue, man.
No, seriously. Like the actress who plays the mom is fantastic. She's so good.
Oh my goodness, man. She captured that essence of like pureness. Marbelle Verdue was phenomenal. I couldn't agree with you more, man. She was you can understand why someone would go back to enjoy someone that has such pureness to them. I thought the performance was great by her.
100%. She's great. And then, Michael Keaton, it's nice to see him back in the saddle. I feel like he's skipped the beat, but it's obviously, it feels like he's kind of like he's a Batman who isn't really quite sure what to do with himself necessarily, that he's like become jaded or whatever. He just feels like he doesn't have a purpose anymore. It's like, oh, well, like there's no crime in the city.
Yeah.
So why do people really need me? I
Right.
think he hasn't figured out that like crusade doesn't end with just like one thing. Like, it can
Yeah.
kind of go on.
Yeah.
Like he can be around to save the world. And I think Barry kind of reminds him of the duty and the oath that he kind of took up. And there were several moments actually where I really liked what they did with Keaton's character. I think one of my favorite moments in the film is a really quiet moment after they've rescued Supergirl, and we get that scene of him stitching himself up. He doesn't say anything, but to me,
Look in the mirror.
yeah. It's like
There you are.
There's also felt like there was a little bit of self-awareness, or it was a bit self-reflective, where he's like, wow, this like Alfred used to help me do this. Alfred used to stitch me up, and now I'm the same age that he is, and he's no longer here. And so there is this almost kind of, I don't know, self-reflection on who he is as a person, how far he's come, along with like, oh wow, I recognize myself again, like you said. So that was
the literal scars as
yeah.
Like the scars are shaping him, and it's kind of a reflection of what he used to bring and his past coming back. Yeah, it's great stuff. And then also too, just getting your insight on Sasha. This is I think this is her first big outing. I think she's done other smaller stuff, but she didn't have and we'll get to some of the criticisms in a bit after we get past some of the visual effects and all that, which is the next topic. But I thought her small, limited screen time to me was very impactful, very stoic
I really
performance by her. Much so to Gal Gadot, her first time in BVS, which was a standout to me. Like, she had her scene with Bruce Wayne at the museum, and then when she is super, Wonder Woman, it's like, this is it. This is just superhero to the umpteenth degree. In the same nature of stoicness, heroicness, a warrior, a leader, compassionate, Kryptonian. She did all that to me in her small limited time, and I just want to get your thoughts on Sasha's performance as Supergirl.
She was great. She was intense. It was fun. It was interesting when we were first introduced to her. I thought for a second they might be doing like a little bit of a twist on like Superman Red Sun, because she's being kept in like a Russian prison and whatnot. But I mean, they didn't. But it was kind of cool just to kind of think about, okay, what if Superman did not crash land where he did, what would have happened? And I think you see that firsthand with Kara, who is really just kind of thrust into the fire of like humanity's capacity for violence and
the darkness
evil.
Of humanity. Seeing the humane and the nice and the kindness of the Kents versus the opposite with her.
Yeah, exactly. And I think with her, you really see why she would become jaded on humanity as a whole, why she wouldn't necessarily want to help them and everything. And like she feels like she's a much colder individual, which I think Sasha is able to kind of get to the heart of, but she still believes in the principles of her people, which is why I think it's great when you see Zod, like the first thing he does when he comes to Earth is he kills someone and immediately kind of like throws her entire worldview of her people. It throws it for a loop, and then it puts it into perspective for her. And I would have liked to have seen more of her cynicism and her pain, and like the conflict between like, these people suck, but my own people suck. And I would have liked a little bit more in terms of like that self-realization, because it feels like it happens a little too fast because the film needs it to. But I'm able to roll along with it because I get where they're going with it, and I think it works well enough. It makes sense, like like Barry offered her a hand when she needed a hand. He showed compassion and empathy, and she saw that, and then in turn paid it forward. And it all goes back to the fact that like Barry was able to do all of that because that's what he saw in his mom. And I think in the scenes you see between Barry and his mom, those moments are so pronounced, and it's like she is such a good person, and you understand why Barry turned out the way he did.
Exactly, man.
So it's it's really
to that point of that scene when he saves Supergirl, he didn't have his superpowers. That just shows the heart. Even without his powers, he has that innate ability to see when someone's in need, regardless of being attacked by the Russians, bullets flying all over the place. He saw someone needed help and he saved her. And great point to call out as far as how she paid it back in full. And I definitely think, to your point, as far as Sasha's performance, nothing against her, but the story of it all, it almost was like planting the seed, going back to my Gal Gadot comparison. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of how Zach was saying how she, threw away humanity after losing Steve Trevor, I like how Patty Jenkins retconned that, because, Wonder Woman would never give up on humanity. But I almost liken it to how this was just the tease of Supergirl, And I thought, they were probably, before all the DCU, James Gunn, Peter Safran came in, they probably wanted to follow up with that to give us more of the story you were referring to and diving deep into that aspect. But unfortunately, we'll see what James Gunn does, because I would love for her to come back to be the DCU.
I would too.
Supergirl. I would love that a lot. But I totally agree with you, man. I don't think there was a weak now, there are some characters that I didn't care for, but just overall speaking, I thought the performances across the board were great. But to get into the superhero of it all, Griff, the next topic with you, action and visual effects, and combining the two. Now, I thought that the action beats, first off, the opening, as I talked about up top, being a Justice League fan, it was like watching a cartoon with Batman calling Barry and the whole funny moments, which, by the way, the tone and the jokes really stuck with me in this film. I thought it wasn't forced. It was all kind of organic. They knew when to end the joke and to get more serious. But the open the film, Justice League saving the day. We get our cameo from Wonder Woman. So I thought that action set piece, the baby shower, was great. Yeah, the rescue of Supergirl action was pretty fantastic. And then we'll talk about it later with my cons, but I thought that the spectacle aspect and the visceral fighting of Supergirl and Zod in the third act had some cool beats. So transitioning to your thoughts on the action, but also acknowledging, and I was being nice the first time I saw it because it wasn't a final cut of the visual effects. So in the back of my head, I'm like, oh, maybe when it comes out later on, it'll look better. Seeing it a second time last night, Griff, it's not horrendous. I've seen worse, but knowing that this film has had many years to cook and bake the visual effects, it should have been better, Griff. So again, just talking the overall action and the hiccups, some of the praise of the visual effects. Like I thought, like you mentioned, the the Speed Force was gorgeous, but some of those other visual effects, Griff, were pretty bad. So your thoughts, man?
Yeah, I guess I'll start with the action before I go into the visual effects. I like the action. The opening of the film is so comic booky. It like reminded me of
so great, man.
Yeah, the way like the old Schumacher Batman films kind of opened, which I know some people will be like, oh Jesus.
Right,
but like there's like a fun campiness to it. Like there's a whimsy to it all that I really dug. It was
the title card of the Flash being stopped, interrupted.
Yeah. It wasn't afraid to embrace the genre it's a part of, which I think so many movies are afraid to, and I like the fact that it just kind of went for it and it really worked. Yeah, to your point, I think including Wonder Woman, Batman, Flash going to Gotham City, all of this stuff,
the world building over the past 10 years.
Yeah, dude, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, like I think a lot of interconnected universes treats their interconnectivity as like a post-credit scene or like a cameo or something like that. They don't actually work to help make the world lived in. And this is one of those rare examples where this was such a great sequence because the world felt lived in. It's like, oh, if Batman had a problem in Gotham and there were two things going on, he couldn't get to both of them, what is he going to do? He's going to call a member of the Justice League because we already know the Justice League exists. If one of them can't show up, he'll call another one. And eventually we get the Flash and Wonder Woman shows up at the end to save both of them. And we get a nice moment of just, levity between all three of them. It shows their dynamic. That is so cool. And that shows that the writers and whoever knows how to work within an interconnected universe and make it flow and feel natural, not just like, oh, this person appeared in the post-credit scene for this movie. It's like, nah, if it's a world, like let's take advantage of the world of it all. So that was really good. Love the baby shower, hated the VFX for it. The fake babies were really distracting, but like literally everything outside of the fake babies, like his movements,
I'm loving all this stuff going on, but
it's so hard. Yeah, like that's the weird thing about it, because it's like there are these really small isolated moments of bad VFX. Yeah. And they're surrounded by things that look pretty good. So like it's one of those things where it's like I can kind of overlook it because everything else looks pretty good, but it's also like even more distracting. Like, I don't know, man. Like seeing both cuts of the film, it really shows that there wasn't that much that changed, and I can almost get behind some of like the 3D model, like video game PS3 looking people.
The human eye couldn't fathom how someone would move so quickly, and it's the imagination of it all. It's like a comic book, right? We kind of lose that sense of like agency of like this is someone else's story, and we're seeing their creation of life versus, but yeah.
No, exactly. And I can almost get behind that, but then there are times when it gets back to normal speed and he's pulling a baby out of an oven. Like the bun in the oven joke is pretty funny, but like he's pulling it out and it looks it looks like a PS3 like video game model, and it's just like, oh Jesus. So that was raw. The action bit with Supergirl is really good, especially that like pseudo one take. I thought that was a really cool way of shooting that. Again, the VFX kind of hinder it from packing the punch that it should, but I mean, it works. The final battle is fine. I just really hate the location. It's just really, it's nothing.
Empty
it's just an
desert.
open.
Yeah.
I get it because that's where it happened in Man of Steel. It's like, well, no, Zod came down in the middle of a desert.
All the criticism of Man of Steel, of the destruction of Metropolis and the thousands of lives. So like, let's take that out of that so we don't have people saying we're killing innocent humans. And so I get the mechanics of it, but I think visually speaking, it's just not as exciting as it could have been. Very dull, which I mean is a perfect segue to what didn't work in this film. So to that point. The third act to me, Griff, on a second rewatch, there's moments, right? Like I love the Batman taking on a Kryptonian, doing, Michael Keaton putting the bombs on him. And, I love that stuff. Visually speaking, the Barry Allens working together and him using, a Barry Allen, an 18-year-old using his powers for the first time and seeing all that. But and if I'm being honest, Griff, I love Man of Steel with everything. I love Michael Shannon so much, but I could have went without Zod in this film. Zack Snyder's universe, or recreating that scene, didn't work for me. And Michael Shannon, he's even said so in some of these Vanity Fair interviews that he just felt like an action figure, and it plays that way because
it definitely does.
He's just there, and it sucks because he's such a great villain. But the third act is really my biggest issue, Griff. But also pairing that with, I thought some of the pacing, the second half to me really didn't work. It worked a lot better for me the second viewing because one of my biggest issues was this felt like it was a missing chapter of Barry's story. Like, again, knowing that we came from Justice League and to catch up with him here, I feel like there was something else there that we could have saw more of the development of him learning his powers and things of that nature. But then on a second rewatch, I appreciated some of that superhero montage of young Barry learning his powers because that made up for us not seeing him phasing for the first time, him using certain powers for the first time. So I'm like, oh, it's kind of going backwards, and we're seeing how Barry would have learned how to get the suit perfected so he doesn't burn himself and how to slow down and things of that nature. So I appreciate that on the second go round. But again, there's a missing chapter still for me in that third act. It's just not stick the landing visually. I love the conclusions to the arc of his mom, but what were some things for you, Griff, that stood out to you? I know you said you saw it 3 times and on the third viewing still didn't work with you. What were those things for you?
I think the third viewing was when I kind of got a little burnt out on it. And it wasn't necessarily because of the film itself. I still think it's a great movie. I think it's a beautiful narrative, and I think it does kind of capture that same like superhero existentialism that Sam Raimi did in Spider-Man 2, which I think I compared it to. Your point, I really like the basically experiencing the superhero origin story in a way that we haven't seen before. Like the character is going through the motions of an origin, but there's 2 of them. So there's the one that's doing that, and there's the one that's kind of learning the next step of their process as a hero, and he's also trying to help himself become a better hero. So it's like going through the trials we don't necessarily see, but then he's helping the other version of himself kind of get through that the best way he can. But I don't know. It was just it was a cool framing device for an origin story that helped make it stand apart from other origins. The third act's really interesting to me because there's nothing that I really like dislike about it. Like I think it all plays out pretty well. It makes sense to me. The multiverse at least makes a lot of sense. I don't think that it's super convoluted or hard to follow. I think as opposed to most multiversal things, they do a pretty decent job of explaining it and getting metaphors cool and whatnot. The Dark Barry kind of representing the grandfather paradox of it all, and he's I made you create me, and like I understand how that can get a little like much for people, but I think like it worked because it was Barry talking with himself at like you said, every point
of himself,
and they had all kind of eventually by the end of it all they learn that they have what they have to do, and they're all finally on the same page, which I think is a pretty powerful way of showing it. My big issues when it comes to the third act really come down to the visuals. It's not even necessarily the storytelling. I just think that the VFX inside the Chrono Bowl are so distractingly bad. They're like genuinely some of the worst visual effects I have ever seen in a big budget film of this scale and size, and especially in the year 2023.
Especially 5 years of making this movie.
That's what I'm saying. It's awful because I feel bad for these VFX artists because I don't blame them, especially because 90% of the stuff looks like post-viz. It doesn't even look like finished visual effects. So it's like I can't judge these artists on the work that is presented because the studio decided, no, we got to get this movie out now. And it's like, no, you really like this thing is going to have a shelf life of eternity. People are going to come back and they're going to revisit this thing. Yeah. Are you real? Is this really what you're going to put out there? Do you genuinely think that's acceptable? Like, film is a visual medium. That's the storytelling. If the visuals are that distractingly bad, then like what do you expect people to do? And you know, there are people who are going to dunk on it. And it's just it was such a cynical play by I don't know whose decision it was to do this. I'm just gonna say the higher ups of Warner Brothers, but it's like it was such a cynical play and such a condescending way of looking at audience members. Like, oh, they're not gonna notice these bad visual effects. It's fine. It didn't look like The Rock from The Mummy Returns, which is basically what this is. Like, I'm not even joking. Like, it's like I know that like that sounds. I know that sounds harsh, but like, fuck, man. And like I would be to what we were saying earlier, I would be able to buy it if like it was stuff inside the Chrono Bowl, right? Sure, like if it was just like, okay, this is an artistic interpretation of how this stuff looks. But then you have Barry moving around the Chrono Bowl, going through these different scenarios, talking with himself inside of it, and one of them looks like a PlayStation 3 model, and the other is Ezra Miller. And so it's like it's really bad.
To that point, did it ever distract you? Because you can see it sometimes when both Barrys are on screen, which I know they this new technology to really perfect that. It was very apparent when it wasn't the different Barry in the scene. Some of it was smoother than others, but sometimes like, wow, that is Princess Leia levels of like doesn't look terrible. Like Uncanny Valley type of conversation going on. Yeah.
Yeah, like it's a face replacement, man. Like we've been doing this for decades. In fact, we've been doing this before we even had the visual effects to be able to do it the way that they chose to do it in this film. They used to just shoot it twice with a clean plate in there. And like it's like this is like, you know, if you're gonna have someone playing two characters in the same room, that's like that kind of filmmaking 101, and the fact that they were not able to do that and have it look as distracting as it did is really abysmal. Like I don't know who to blame for that. Like I don't know if that's Andy Muschietti's fault. I doubt it, but again, he is the director here, so I don't know. I don't know if it was like a lack of time that the visual effects artists had to work on this.
Is a factor,
or the way they chose to shoot it. Like, if they just should have shot it the way they did it in the old days, if it was really going to be this much of an issue, because good God, man, it's so bad when they're in the same scene and one's face looks like fuzzy CGI mush. It's oh God.
And plus too, you would imagine it was a mixture of obviously making the but Ezra Miller look younger as well because of he's 7 years younger. So it's all that visual effects on top of having another actor put in there. It's rough, man. I think the visual effects for a lot of us will be something that stands out, especially knowing that this is a movie that's been in the oven for so long. So I definitely agree with you there, man. But going back to what you mentioned about Dark Flash, and this is a little bit of my biasness playing into knowing the Flash, knowing Flashpoint. The fact that they don't have Reverse Flash to me bothered me in this film, especially knowing that this film doesn't like definitively, and sure you can have some mystery, but the fact that they don't even try to address who killed his mother is baffling to me, that they never really even like I think Barry says in the point like, oh, my mom must have had a knife and whoever was there, just burglary randomly in the day with a son of it's so weird that they never addressed that. Now I know the idea is probably to address that in the sequel, but I'm always one of those, like, let's focus on, you don't have to give me the reveal in this film, but to not even acknowledge the death of his mom, who would have killed her, was baffling to me. Did that bother you at all, that they didn't really, and again, it doesn't have to be reverse Flash, but the fact that they didn't acknowledge the death of his mom, like the murderer, the killer, it was kind of weird to me.
Yeah, I guess that's true. Yeah, there's a little bit of mystery there. I don't think it matters. I think it doesn't matter if it's reverse Flash. If it's reverse Flash, that just kind of feels like an unnecessary bit of just like, oh, we're trying to do it exactly as they did it in Flashpoint. I don't think you need to do that. I think just knowing that something happens to her that is unpreventable is really all it comes down to. And I think Barry recognizing that he has to go back and take the tomatoes that he put in her cart and put it back on the shelf. You know, he even says it's like, well, that's us basically killing our mom because we have to know, because we know that we had the power to save her. But there's a trade-off. There's all these other things, and so powerful. I think in a sense, like, Barry has to come to terms with the fact that he can't save her. I'm happy that Reverse Flash wasn't in this film, because I think it would have been too much. It's another character with more motivations that we would have to unpack, and I just save him for a Flash movie where Barry has to go up against his equal. Yeah.
And it's funny enough, I've seen it for the second time, and I thought it was him the first time. I can't think of the actor's name off top. I think it's Nikolai, Jamie Lannister from Game of Thrones. He has a brief cameo.
Oh, yeah.
And I almost was like, because I remember for many years there was speculation about who should be Reverse Flash, Matthew McConaughey, Homelander, Anthony Starr. So I'm like, I wonder if that's like a wink. And plus, I know that the actor worked with Andy Muschietti for in Mama. So it's like probably
they're friends. Yeah.
But I was like, oh, is that the Reverse Flash secretly?
That's just
this timeline. But I don't know. And like I said, I'll be 100%. It's the biasness of like knowing the story and knowing how integral Reverse Flash is to Barry, and knowing that throughout most stories that Reverse Flash is the one responsible for the death of his mother. So, and I rarely do that, Griff, where I'm like, the comic said, I rarely do that, because 99% of the comic book movies are adaptations of the comics and not like a Zack Snyder's Watchmen, a page by page. But I was secretly, I don't know, Griff, this is, like I said, I'll 100% take, the biasness of it, that I wish Reverse Flash, or at least the acknowledgement of how his mother died, was a little bit more of a vocal point in the story. But wrapping up, Griff, man, this has been such a great, again, I love talking to you about these films, man, and breaking them down. But getting down to the last nitty gritty of it all, Griff, and wrapping up with the ending of the movie, the post-credit scene, but also the cameos, Griff. And I'll run it down. I wrote it down in my notes here as far as the cameos that I remember off top. We talked about Jeremy Irons up top. I wouldn't say Ben Affleck was a cameo. Gal Gadot was definitely a cameo. But then as we pivot into this third act, where Barry has to finally come to accepting his mother die, and we know that the young Barry doesn't want that, and we get the reveal of Dark Flash. We get as the posters have been alluded to, worlds collide. And this is where we get, and I definitely want to get your thoughts on the commentary of how it's distasteful, or could be distasteful for some. Christopher Reeves, George Reeves, Helen Slater, Adam West, Nicolas Cage, Griff, which that is a deep, deep cut for those that are very familiar with that piece to John Schnepp. But and then we'll talk about George Clooney, and then of course Jason Momoa. The ending of the film, Griff, your thoughts on how it wraps up the story, the conclusion with the emotional beat with Barry saying goodbye to his mom, pivoting over to that scene of all the different cameos, if you feel like it was just fan service, distasteful fan service, and then your thoughts on, as we'll talk about, George Clooney, Griffin, coming up in this film, and pivoting over to the post-credit scene. Take it away, man.
The ghoulish cameos first. I'm still not entirely sure. I'm of two minds. I was literally just talking about this with someone earlier today, because there's obviously the picture of Christopher Reeve going around as Superman. I hate it, and yet I've somehow rationalized why it kind of works for me. Like kind of what I was talking about earlier. I don't think it's supposed to be something that's celebrated, and yet I know some studio exec was like saying that, oh, we need to throw all of these people in there because this is our No Way Home. Like, I know that like No Way Home came out, and then they were like, oh, well, we got to put cameos in our movie because people want to see that in our movie. But there is something interesting about the fact that every single cameo during that scene is from an actor that has played the character that is now dead. Or it's, in the case of Nicolas Cage Superman, it's something that never happened. Feels like it's in line with that cautionary tale of trying to resurrect the past in order to like bring it into the forefront. It could be like, oh, this is really what you want. You want all of these possibilities. You want us to continue using Christopher Reeve as Superman. You want us to you want to see that Nick Cage Superman movie now. We're gonna throw it all together, and it's gonna be fucking abysmal and gross, and it's gonna just like completely obliterate any semblance of a thing that's going on here. And so on one hand, like I think it works in that regard because of how gross and off-putting it is. At the same time, the way that some of the cameos are shot look like they're supposed to be celebratory, and so there's a weird disconnect between what I feel like the intention is and the way that it's presented. On top of that, there's no reason that we should be using like CGI models of Christopher Reeve or George Reeves or the original actor who played Jay Garrick or Adam West, for a matter of fact. Like there are countless amounts of archival footage that you can use.
They have hundreds and thousands of hours of these actors.
That's what. That's what I'm saying.
Versus the CGI video game look.
Like if you already got the approval from the estate that they could be featured in this film, why did you not go and use that footage? And on top of like, there's so, especially with the Christopher Reeve one, because his death was so public and it's so just like tragic and all that. It's like, why would you do that? Like it. I don't understand. I really don't understand why they thought that was acceptable. Like they're really completely unnecessary. And you could still end with the George Clooney one because that's fun and that's like really it's kind of like
we'll get to George Clooney.
Well, I want to get into that because that's one of the I'm shocked that I actually liked that one. But the Chrono Bowl ones were really, really bad. And then on top of that, like Nicolas Cage shot stuff for this, right? That's what Andy Muschietti said.
He was able to work with.
Why did he look like a 3D model? Like that's
Griff, your guess.
If you're gonna have the actor shoot stuff, why not just feature him? Again,
it's still rendering, Griff. That's what I've been told.
It probably is.
I have no idea. It's going to be on the Blu-ray special features if those are still a thing in the future.
I genuinely hope that a remastered version of this film comes out where all of those cameos are just archival footage, and the Nick Cage one is genuinely just like him shooting the scene. I just it blew me away.
Before we get your thoughts on George Clooney and Jason Momoa, to piggyback on your thoughts, I'm in two minds as well. Like I've seen the online Discord. We're filming this on a Tuesday on the 13th, and a lot of people feel disgusted, and rightfully so. To each their own. I'm not one to tell people how they feel. I am in the camp of I get the idea. It is as I said in my first review, it's a love letter to DC. It's a love letter to what's come before. Again, as you mentioned, it plays into the idea of going back to the past and showing what the past was in order to move forward. But Griff, I'm 100% with you, man. You have all this archive footage of it, and not to bring in Across the Spider-Verse, but how they used, spoiler alert for that, the cameos of a Tobey Maguire and Andrew Garfield. They use footage of their films. Could they just use a Christopher Reeve saving the cat from the tree or Helen sharing? Why couldn't they just use the footage versus what they decided to go with? It's baffling. Nick Cage, I got a good kick out of it. I don't know if the general audience might get that. It might be Googling after it. But for those that might not understand the significance of the Kevin Smith film that was supposed to be written and directed, Tim Burton with Nick Cage as the character, it never came to be. His hat knock on it, directed by John Schnepp, rest in peace. But I got a kick out of that. But like you, Griff, Nick Cage is still alive, Warner Brothers. And as Griff alluded to, they filmed the scene with him doing this. Why not just choose that versus the video game design? So I'm of two minds of like, I get the intent, but I thought the execution was poorly done. What saved this kind of crazy head scratching moment was, again, the ending of Barry saying goodbye to his mom, saving his father. But then that leads us into the actual ending, which the first time I saw this, Griff, like 3 or 4 weeks ago, they cut off the movie when he says fuck, and then it just cuts off. We don't see George Clooney or Batman. So tossing it to you, Griff, what did you think before we get to the post-credit scene? George Clooney coming out of the car again. It is well documented that a lot of people do not accept George Clooney as their Batman with Batman and Robin. But to have George Clooney, I got the joke. I would have loved, and I know it would have never happened, but the Christian Bale of it all would have been so great to me because
oh no, I don't want them touching that. That would have made me mad. That would have
pissed you. Well,
yeah.
Wait, let me know, Griff. How did you feel about the George Clooney of it all? I know there was speculation months ago that it scooped. Some scoopers were saying that maybe this might be the DCU Brave and the Bold, older grizzled Batman will be George Clooney, but I think James Gunn has debunked that. But did you get a good kick out of that? And then lead into your thoughts on the post-credit scene. I did not like it. Jason Momoa coming out of a bar drunk. I guess it's like, hey, we'll see you in December for Aquaman 2. Your thoughts on Mr. Clooney and your thoughts on that post-credit scene.
Yeah, I loved it. When George Clooney comes out of that car, man, he's just walking. It's just like the presence of George Clooney. This man is crazy, just,
man. I'll give him that. The man has swagger.
He's a movie star, dude. That guy just has. 100%. Oh, I miss seeing him.
Yeah,
that's really what it was. I was just like, oh, the gravitas, the just like the swagger, the movie starness that is George Clooney. God, please just let him play Danny Ocean for the rest of his life, please. So yeah, but also just like I thought it was funny, man. Like I don't know, like it is, like you know, Barry changed something, and like he thought he could just change this one thing, and that nothing was gonna happen. But it's like no, you put that can of tomatoes on the top of that shelf. This Batman is coming in, and you're gonna have to deal with it if you want your dad not to be in prison. It's a give and take, and so it's in line with the rest of what Barry has to learn, and it's like, what can you live with? I think that's a really funny terms of like sci-fi-ness. Like it's very like Planet of the Apes sort of thing. Like you think that you fixed everything, you get back, and it's like that was kind of cool. I really. And like George Clooney, of all the actors, like obviously makes sense. You can't really have Val Kilmer do it anymore. You don't touch Christian Bale. You just don't fucking touch Christian Bale. Michael Keaton already in this. George Clooney is in the second Schumacher film, and I think those movies closely resemble what's going on here. On top of it just being like kind of like a funny little cameo, I just I don't know. It doesn't overstay its welcome. It's a funny stinger, and I'll say this: if George Clooney was the Batman going forward in Brave and the Bold,
we talked about it. Griff starts from scratch.
Yes, I mean obviously, start from scratch. But like, I'm just saying, if they wanted to have him, would you say
it's George Clooney not from the Schumacher, but is George Clooney playing a different version of Batman that you're saying, or you would want George Clooney experiencing Robin and having Damian? You would want that George Clooney story from Schumacher to be the new DCEU. This clarification.
Yeah. I don't know. I just the idea of George Clooney. George Clooney is a much better actor now than he was back when he was playing Batman.
100%. Yeah. And I don't even really blame a lot of that stuff. That was a lot of like the studio notes of like goofy over the topness, the bat nipples of it all. Also, Jason Momoa, man. Did you care for that? I didn't really care for it, and I think I let some of the hype of like when Andy Muschietti said we have a couple more surprises. I didn't know. I was thinking in my head like, is it going to show maybe an inside of James Gunn's world? But am I missing something, Griff? It's Arthur. He's talking to Arthur. He's telling him what happened. He's drunk. He's still Aquaman, but you know, and he passes out. And I don't know. I didn't really enjoy the post-credit scene. Did you? Am I missing something, Griff? Is it supposed to be something more insightful there? Is it supposed to set up Aquaman 2? That this is the Aquaman that might be? I don't know. What did you take away from the post-credit scene?
Yeah, the post-credit scene's a little weird because it feels like a joke that only makes sense if you've seen the end of the movie, which is why they didn't show it during the CinemaCon cut. Just kind of like, oh, in all the worlds that we went to, you and I are the same, but there's like multiple different Batmen and stuff like that. Like, that's kind of funny.
Yeah.
I feel like you could probably take it as like those two are going to continue on into the DCU. Not necessarily that like the continuity has of like the past is going to be the same, but like those two guys can carry on playing these characters.
Only thing I took away, Griff, is again just knowing how the DCEU have used Barry Allen and Aquaman so far. They've had this kind of big brother, little brother vibes from Justice League, and then we saw the Joke in Peacemaker and Joke in this film, the Mermaid with which I will say the Back to the Future deep cut of Michael J. Fox not being Marty McFly was pretty funny. But
Yeah.
I don't think there's much to take away from it. I'm sure there'll be thousands of videos exploring the possibilities of what this post credits can mean. But I think I don't think it's much of anything besides just a funny, like you mentioned, a joke. I think we've covered it. This film, top to bottom, from performances, direction, story, narrative, visual effects, what worked, what didn't work, and of course, we talked about the ending here, Griff. Final comments, and we'll wrap it up, man. Is the next time we'll see the Flash, and in particularly, will it be played by Ezra Miller?
The character is obviously not on DC's slate for this first chapter of their universe.
On there. Yeah.
I think it might be a little bit Ezra Miller to reprise their role as the Flash if it is as popular with audiences as they seem to think it's going to be. And if it is, does that mean they fast track a Flash movie, a Flash sequel, and kind of work it into the current DCU slate? Apparently they have one written, or at least they have an idea for a Flash sequel. I don't know. Will we ever see Ezra Miller as the Flash again? That's the big question.
No, I don't really have one either. I mean, based on what we saw and when we're pre-recording this, Ezra Miller was at the red carpet and got a chance to speak to the press and had a moment to thank Andy Muschietti and all the people that helped them get to this point. But, Hollywood, Griff, as we all know, it's been well documented. It's about giving people second chances. And I know how a lot of people, and rightfully so, how they feel about Ezra Miller, and kind of just not even bringing up a whole nother can of worms of like how Jonathan Majors and how that situation's been handled versus like an Ezra Miller, how that's been handled. It's a deeper conversation to be had. But we know one thing, Griff, like I said, Hollywood is a very forgiving industry, and it's been well documented of a lot of actors making terrible, terrible, terrible mistakes, but yet getting the opportunities to continue to be in the household, in the zeitgeist of pop culture. So I'm in the camp, if I'm being honest, Griff. I want Ezra Miller to get as much help as they can need, because I do believe that people do deserve second chances, as this film kind of alluded to, but also just from a human perspective, if they put in the work to do right, to address the issues that they have committed, as well as the victims that have been affected by them, then I'm all about second chances in that sense. But that doesn't necessarily mean I want to see them playing Barry Allen again. So we'll see what comes of it, Griff. 70 to 80 million open weekend, which, who's to say it might not do more or do less, but we'll see what comes of it. But I think at the end of the day, Griff, as we talked about, fun film, great narrative, great performances. And I think as far as the DCEU is concerned, with now Blue Beetle and Aquaman, it's a film that we can remember as one of the better ones moving forward. So
absolutely.
Any final thoughts from you?
Yeah, actually, I want to pull up my ranking here real quick, because I want to remember. I want to know where I have it on my DCU ranking. I mean, I think I definitely prefer the Snyder. The Snyder trilogy is those occupy my top 3 spots. But I think it goes for me. This is controversial. Batman v Superman, the Ultimate Edition, Man of Steel, then Zack Snyder's Justice League, then the Suicide Squad, and then currently I have the Flash about tied with Wonder Woman 1984. Which, I know some people don't really care too much for Wonder Woman 1984. I really dig it. And I think both that film and The Flash have the same kind of old school lightheartedness to them. This charm that I think is largely lost from comic book films these days. Just there's something old fashioned about how both of those films feel. And I really dug it despite the flaws. So yeah, one of the greatest comic book films of all time, definitely not, but it's a really solid comic book movie that's I think it's better than most of the slop that we get, but that doesn't mean that it's like top tier, one of the best. It's just it's really good.
I agree, man. And listen, Griff, I'm gonna speak into existence, man. We gotta team back up and maybe do a rankings of our DCEU and compare our lists, especially with Blue Beetle and Aquaman coming out later this year.
Absolutely, yeah.
Griff, man, I really mean this to the core, man. It is always an honor and a privilege to just talk to you, whether it's DC, Marvel, likewise. Star Wars. We've collabed a lot, man. Lovecraft Country, Mandalorian. I've had nothing but the greatest times with you, man. So I really appreciate you joining me today, Griff, talking about the Flash, the good, the bad, the ugly, and everything in between. So outroing this thing out, man. If you want to let the people know where they can find you, and again, we're recording this June 13th. What's next on Film Speak, man, in the coming weeks?
Flash video out, or it'll be on the horizon within the next couple of days. I'll have a Transformers video out. And then we got Indie, baby. We got Indy 5 Dial of Destiny. I'm seeing that tomorrow. I can't wait. And I'll definitely have a video out on that, and also a video out on Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. A little bit of a retrospective on that one. Yeah, and then we're getting into July, baby. Then we've got Mission, Barbie, Oppenheimer. The summer is fantastic. So if you want to check out any of the deep dives I'm going to be doing on any of those films, you can follow the Film Speak channel. You can also follow me on Twitter at Griff Schiller.
To see all the things that Griff just said he has on the horizon. And like you said, Griff, yeah, this summer, on top of, Secret Invasion and other various different shows and movies, Mission Impossible, Dead Reckoning, Griff. Woo!
Love it. Can't wait,
man. But listen, man, I'm so thankful again for your time, Griff. Hopefully we can do this in the future. And guys, as we wrap up, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, hit the like, hit the share, leave your thoughts of the movie once you've seen it in the comments. And of course, not only support myself here at MovieFiles, but like I said, support my man Griffin, who is just awesome and is doing great things on this YouTube space. So again, for myself and Griff, we appreciate you, and we will catch you all on the next video.